Welcome back. 30 minutes before the opening bell sounds for a Tuesday. Let's check markets here with selling pressure underway. Dow Industrials down 97. The Nasdaq's up 20 points ahead of some key earnings tonight and Thursday. Final thoughts right here. Scott Martin.
Markets finally giving some folks an opportunity to buy, Maria, especially on the hourly by hour basis when Trump fixes all these things trade-wise. Mexico getting the picture. Justin Trudeau figuring out where his croissant is buttered. Buy this market.
Samantha Dravis.
President Trump has accomplished more in these first 2 weeks than any other president before him.
Right.
He's not asking permission. He's not asking forgiveness from these bureaucrats. He's implementing his America First agenda. So far, he's used tariffs very effectively as a negotiating tool.
Absolutely. We've got toughness back in the White House, Cheryl.
All right. Yeah, we've also got confirmation votes again today. Watching RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, Maria.
Great. And we'll talk about it tomorrow. Varney and Company picks it up. Guys, have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you again tomorrow. And it is time for the hot topic of the hour as President Trump prepares to talk with Xi Jinping, potentially as soon as today. Beijing announces retaliatory tariffs on the United States beginning February 10th, after President Trump's 10% import tariff on China went into effect at midnight last night. China's plan includes a 15% tariff on U.S. coal and liquefied natural gas, 10% on crude oil, agricultural machinery and large vehicles, and export controls on key rare minerals. It will also open an antitrust probe into Google, months after doing the same to NVIDIA. Meanwhile, Trump striking deals with both Canada and Mexico to pause his 25% tariffs for 30 days. Prime Minister Trudeau agreeing to put Canada's $1.3 billion border plan into effect, sending upwards of 10,000 troops to the northern border. He will also create a fentanyl czar position. He'll list cartels as terrorists and launch a joint strike force combat organized crime. Mexico's President Sheinbaum also vowing 10,000 troops to the border with promised cooperation with key American cabinet positions. Trump also hinted yesterday that the European Union could face tariffs next. Watch.
We have massive deficits with the European Union, massive, like $350 billion, if you can believe it. They don't take our farm product. They don't take our cars. They don't take almost anything, but we take their cars. We have millions of cars coming in. We don't charge them tariffs. They make it impossible to sell cars in the European Union. They make it very difficult, agricultural product. They actually don't take it, and they have a lot of excuses.
So it looks like the expectation is for the tariffs on Europe to start mid-February. Samantha, your reaction?
Well, what we're seeing right now is really the art of the deal in real time. President Trump has made it clear these aren't tariffs just for the sake of tariffs. There's a broader strategy at play here, and it has to do first and foremost with resetting the table with regard to how America is treated and fairness. So whether you're a friend, ally, neighbor, or adversary, America is going to demand to be treated fairly. We've seen just within 24 hours, President Trump was able to get done more than has been done in the last 4 years. He's also made it clear this is not just a trade war, it's a drug and crime war. And so with respect to Canada and Mexico in particular, they've got a very troubling relationship with the cartels, and they need to do more to secure their side of the border with respect to this drug and crime war.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I said first thing out of the gate yesterday. This is a drug war, not a trade war, because I know President Trump doesn't want to start a trade war, but he does want reciprocity, and he wants the U.S. to be treated fairly. He also signed an executive order yesterday to create the first ever U.S. sovereign wealth fund with a suggestion on what could be the first purchase. Watch this.
We're going to have a sovereign wealth fund, which we've never had. We have a lot of things that create wealth. As an example, TikTok, we're going to be doing something perhaps with TikTok, and perhaps not. If we make the right deal, we'll do it. Otherwise, we won't. But I have the right to do that, and we might put that in the sovereign wealth fund.
Well, they've got a lot of issues with China. This conversation with Xi Jinping will be important, Cheryl, and I don't know that China is going to want to go all in on, taking Trump to task, because that economy is weaker than anybody understands, and Xi Jinping is weaker than people know. So we'll see how much Xi Jinping wants to take this to the mat.
Well, the sovereign wealth fund idea, I think, is very interesting and intriguing. But on the China front of this, absolutely, Maria, you mentioned that yesterday. You're spot on that their economy is weakened. Xi Jinping is weakened. But on the heels of that, what the Commerce Ministry did overnight, I mean, you mentioned, the broad tariffs on LNG and oil, et cetera. But what I thought was interesting is the Commerce Ministry added several metals and metal-based products to a list of export control actions. And this is things that are used in industrial machinery, aerospace, and military applications. And now we know they give us they give Mexico the chemicals for fentanyl, but they could also hurt us in this way. So I think that there's going to be a very nuanced, very deep conversation between President Trump and Xi Jinping. There has to be.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick are leading that project of a sovereign wealth fund. It's unclear how the fund will be capitalized, but Trump has previously pitched using tariff money. The largest sovereign wealth funds in the world are owned by Norway, China, Hong Kong, and the Emirates. And the view this morning from TD Cowen is the following. We do not see how Treasury can fund a sovereign wealth fund while Treasury is using extraordinary measures to prevent the United States from defaulting on the debt. So you've got that, of course, playing out. Treasury is tapping all available pools of cash to ensure the United States can pay its bill. Diverting funds from this to a sovereign wealth fund could bring forward the so-called X date when the U.S. technically defaults on its debt. So that's also something to think about, Scotty Martin.
Yeah, aren't we waiting for this default on the debt for, I don't know, every year, every month? I mean, like, when is this going to stop? How do you want the Treasury to pay for this? And we're the wealthiest country in the world. We have the money to do. Oh, by the way, we have the world's reserve currency. So what if we print more of it to pay for it or to fill up that wealth fund? Because guess what? We can put money into companies or projects that the government wants to do, and that can grow the fund itself once that gets going.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of a sovereign wealth fund. I certainly do.
I'll put the first dollar in. How about that? Maybe that'll get the naysayers going.
But where's the dedicated funding coming from? The analyst at TD writes, a true sovereign wealth fund would likely need a dedicated funding source, like fees paid to the government for oil and gas leases. Maybe that's where Trump is going with this. Treasury might also find a way to use the proceeds from selling stakes in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as a way to generate funding. We see funding as the most stable if Congress authorizes it. Otherwise, there could be a legal action to block the investments. So lots of questions about how this will work. We're going to get into it this morning. We're just getting started this hour. Joining me now is Wealth Consulting Group CEO Jimmy Lee. Jimmy, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. In the middle of all of that volatility yesterday, you were thinking what?
Good morning, Maria. Yesterday was an interesting day, but for us, it was a great day to buy. We were putting cash to work and reallocating some of the assets into positions that we think will do well this year. So we expected some volatility at the beginning part of this year. Yesterday was a day that we saw some of that, but I'm a buyer on those dips, and I think that there are a lot of sectors I think that'll do well this year.
Well, it's interesting to see the businessman in the Oval Office, President Trump, announcing the first ever U.S. sovereign wealth fund to serve as an economic development tool with a suggestion on what could be one of his first acquisitions. Watch this.
We're going to be doing something perhaps with TikTok and perhaps not. If we make the right deal, we'll do it. Otherwise, we won't. But I have the right to do that. And we might put that in the sovereign wealth fund, whatever we make, or if we do a partnership with very wealthy people, a lot of options.
Look, I think it's a brilliant idea to do a sovereign wealth fund. AI startup Perplexity, meanwhile, confirmed to Fox Business exclusively that the company is bidding on TikTok, saying we're not trying to be disruptive to the existing shareholders, but we're also trying to get what President Trump wants, which is about American control and the government getting equity in the new entity. The purchase would include a 50% joint ownership by the U.S. Jimmy, your reaction?
I think it's a very interesting idea. In fact, I just got back from Palm Beach, and you know what's coming out of the president right now. It's hard to keep up with all the work that's being done and all the accomplishments early on in this presidency here. And so I think a sovereign wealth fund is another idea that can be helpful for the United States. And I think what's going on this year, we have the two big themes as far as the markets go, which will be deregulation and lower interest rates. And I happen to believe that inflation is going to be lower than what people think, and I think the Fed's going to move more. So I think as far as the markets are going to go, by the end of the year, I think we'll have interest rates lower, and I think there'll be a lot of sectors that'll do better, that are interest rate sensitive, and we think we're in the middle of a bull market still. And the sovereign wealth fund is just another idea that could help the United States get a better position around the world, as we've seen sovereign wealth funds, being used by other countries.
Absolutely. Some of the richest countries have sovereign wealth funds, Scotty Martin, and they decide what they want to own and put in that fund to the betterment of the overall financial position of that country. Your thoughts?
Seems like a fair thing to do, Maria. Let's join the party and take the party over. And Jimmy, really appreciate your comments about buying yesterday. I was doing that as well. So thank you for pushing the market up, because all the haters out there, by the way, who are on TikTok, maybe we can kick them off. We're talking about how bad Trump's tariff policies were. Jimmy, one thing you talked about, though, was inflation and growth. Do you really think that we're going to see the Fed move more on interest rates this year as far as the downside, given the fact that we could have this, say, robust rehash of growth going forward with respect to what that does to inflation? I think inflation is actually going to go back up, meaning the Fed stays on the sidelines. What do you think?
I'm on the contrarian side of that. We were on the contrarian side of no recession for the last 2 years as well. Nice. And I think there's a little bit of softness in the data that we'll see that hasn't really come out yet with shelter. And I think that'll be a big part of the story of potentially lower inflation down later this year. And yes, I am on the other side of the consensus of the higher for longer trade. I think we have a little bit of weakness in some of the manufacturing data, as well as some of the companies, doing some small layoffs with a little bit of uncertainty with what's going to happen in the first part of this year with the tariffs, et cetera.
All right, what about earnings, Jimmy? We've got fourth quarter earnings season in full swing. Alphabet is coming out after the bell tonight. Amazon is out on Thursday. We're also watching Fox Corp later this morning. Disney and Uber are out tomorrow. Eli Lilly and Honeywell out on Thursday. How would you assess the fourth quarter earnings season, and would you get in front of these tech numbers coming out tonight and Thursday?
Yes, Maria, I think that I'd be more surprised if earnings were not good. And, we like the cyclical sectors, so we like financials, industrials, even some of the interest rate sensitive ones like real estate, even utilities maybe. But I like tech on the dips. So if we get earnings that causes tech to go down, we're buying on those dips. I think that we're still early in this investing cycle in AI. The hyperscalers are not slowing down their spending, and I think you're going to see other companies benefit from that, and it's going to create a lot of growth in the markets, although I think right now we've got some room for some profit taking and some volatility, and once again, I'd be a buyer on those dips.
All right, we'll be watching that. Jimmy, good to see you this morning. Thanks so much.
Great to see you, Maria.
Let's kick this hour off with the hot topic of the hour. As President Trump prepares to talk with Xi Jinping potentially as soon as today, Beijing is announcing retaliation on the U.S. starting February 10th after Trump's 10% tariff on China went into effect at midnight last night. China's plan includes a 15% tariff on U.S. coal and liquefied natural gas, a 10% tariff on crude oil, agricultural machinery, and large vehicles, and export controls on key rare minerals. It'll also open an antitrust probe into Google, months after doing the same to NVIDIA. Meanwhile, President Trump struck deals with both Canada and Mexico to pause his 25% tariffs for 30 days. Now we are looking to early March for that to take effect. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau agreed to put Canada's $1.3 billion border plan into effect, sending upwards of 10,000 troops to the northern border. He will also create what he is calling a fentanyl czar position. He's listing cartels as terrorists, and he's launching a joint strike force to combat organized crime. Over in Mexico, the president there, President Sheinbaum, is also vowing 10,000 troops to the southern border with a promise of cooperation with key American cabinet positions. Trump also hinted yesterday that the European Union could face tariffs next. Watch.
We have massive deficits with the European Union, massive, like $350 billion, if you can believe it. They don't take our farm product. They don't take our cars. They don't take almost anything, but we take their cars. We have millions of cars coming in. We don't charge them tariffs. They make it impossible to sell cars in the European Union. They make it very difficult, agricultural product. They actually don't take it, and they have a lot of excuses.
And the Wall Street Journal writes this: a U.S.-EU trade war would threaten the world's richest economic relationship. European leaders call for cooperation with Trump, but say they are ready to fight. Samantha.
Well, as we pointed out earlier, this is not going to be a trade war. President Trump is making it clear that access to our markets is a privilege, and we're going to use our American economic position, use that leverage to negotiate. Trade policy and national security are intertwined here. Mexico, especially with respect to the cartels, has had a troubling relationship of enabling them, and so it's time for Mexico and Canada to step up and help us secure our borders. I would also say, you know, America has some of the lowest tariff rates in the world, but $1 trillion of trade deficits. And so there's a fairness issue here that simply has to be addressed.
Yeah. Look, I don't even know if Mexico is able to control the drug lords. Let's face it. You know, I've been told much of Mexico is run by the dangerous drug cartels. So she's trying to do what she can, but can she really stand up to these drug lords who are running the border?
Yeah, well, Maria, that's part of what I was just reading in some of the headlines we're watching for the morning is what these cartels are telling these illegal immigrants to do. I mean, they're talking about explosives. I mean, I think that the cartels, which is look, it's $1 billion industry, to your point, Maria, they're going to go on the attack, you know, and it's a little worrisome, to be honest with you. But on the tariff side of it, with Mexico at least, you know, the Wall Street Journal does say, look, trade with the U.S. is far more important to the Mexican and Canadian economies than trade with them is to ours. They're at the disadvantage, and Donald Trump knows that. But again, are these military, these police in Mexico willing to fight the cartel?
Trump is the guy who's enforced this too, finally. You don't have Joe Biden, a walking zombie, saying, oh, yeah, sure, great idea. You're going to put border people up there. Great. We appreciate it. Trump is the kind of guy who's going to take Mexico to course on this. And so at least there's somebody here watching the store and banning the show, so that at least they're going to follow through on something better than what they've been giving us so far.
Yeah. No, I think that Mexico has major problems keeping the drug lords at bay. They're running Mexico. And so we'll see if she's actually able to move the needle here. It's a good sign that she's going to send the troops to the border, and obviously a good sign that President Trump backed off on the tariffs for a month. But we'll see what happens in terms of progress in the next 30 days. Meanwhile, the president signed an executive order yesterday to create the first ever U.S. sovereign wealth fund with a suggestion on what could be the first purchase of that fund. Watch.
We're going to have a sovereign wealth fund, which we've never had. We have a lot of things that create wealth. As an example, TikTok, we're going to be doing something perhaps with TikTok, and perhaps not. If we make the right deal, we'll do it. Otherwise, we won't. But I have the right to do that, and we might put that in the sovereign wealth fund.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Commerce Secretary hopeful Howard Lutnick leading the project. Right now, it's unclear how the fund will be capitalized, but Trump has previously pitched using tariff money to fund it. The largest sovereign wealth funds in the world are owned by Norway, China, Hong Kong, and the Emirates. Scott, I think that question of who's going to fund this is really the most important question because you don't see Treasury funding a sovereign wealth fund when Treasury is using extraordinary measures to prevent a default, okay? And, you know, there are some analysts this morning at TD Cowen writing this. We worry this could be used to make a politically motivated investments. We do not see either political party turning the fund over to independent managers. And again, who is going to fund this? Your thoughts?
Well, look, you've got other sources of revenue. I mean, look.
I love the idea, by the way. I'm just trying to drill.
No, I think it's a great idea.
It.
And the management of it, you know, who knows? I mean, there's always going to be structural things that are going to come up. I'd love to manage it. I'll throw that into the card there. But the reality is this: we have the ability. We're the most wealthiest country in the world. We have the ability to create little side projects like this to help fund other projects that the government has not been involved in. And we talk about maybe some warrants or rights to companies that are publicly traded that the government could get a handle of. So we already have things kind of mixing up in D.C. We have a very inefficient government. Trump is coming in there with business ideas, as the panelists talked about so far this morning, that are changing the landscape for the U.S. going forward here, and it's going to make us finally more competitive in this world as we've been passed by many countries.
That's right. Scott, what do you think about well, I mean, look, TD Cowen writes this: a true sovereign wealth fund would likely need a dedicated funding source like fees paid to the government for oil and gas leases. That's one idea. A Treasury might also find a way to use the proceeds from selling its stakes in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. A lot of investors want Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to go back to being public companies, sell the stakes that the government has. That's another way of generating funding. What do you think of that?
There's plenty of them. And you can also even put a small little tax in there that's a sovereign wealth tax. Whatever works out, you have ability here in the country that wants to do this potentially to make this thing funded and watch it grow. Watch it take a better path than some of the other sovereign wealth funds that are out there that have had some controversy with them. So regarding Trump's move here, I think it's a great business idea and one that Americans should get behind.
I don't see President Trump instituting any tax, a sovereign wealth tax. Who's going to pay that tax?
Maybe just a small one and reducing
taxes.
other taxes.
That one I'm not into. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to keep zeroing in on this. This sovereign wealth fund idea is big. We're just getting started this hour. Quick break. We continue the conversation about. Welcome back. Time now for the word on Wall Street. Top investors watching your money. Futures this morning indicating another decline at the start of trading this morning. Take a look. The Dow right now is down 89 points, but the Nasdaq has completely reversed course. It is now up 36 points on the Nasdaq. The S&P is lower by 1 1/4. Of course, yesterday a huge reversal of fortune. The Dow rebounding from steep losses yesterday after President Trump put a pause on the tariffs on Canada and Mexico for 30 days. The market ended down about 120 points, but it was down close to 800 early in the day. The S&P was down 45, and the Nasdaq was down 235 at 4 o'clock on Wall Street. Again, bouncing off of the lows. All that in exchange for the two countries sending upwards of 10,000 troops each to secure their respective borders. China retaliation, however, is underway. It is retaliating against the United States overnight, imposing a 15% tariff on coal and LNG gas, plus a 10% tariff on crude oil and farm equipment. Time for the word on Wall Street and investors watching your money. Scott, your thoughts on what China is doing right now?
Not a big surprise, Maria. China not exactly a friend and maybe not quite the foe they used to be because I think they're scared of President Trump. So they're going to play some ball here. You've made some great calls, Maria, on the Chinese economy. Let's use a technical term for that economy. It stinks. They need us. They need us bad, and they need to start behaving. And so Trump's going to put the screws to them. The question is, how long does this take? China, or rather Mexico and Canada have already come to the table and said, okay, we'll make some amends. China, though, I think is going to play this one pretty tough. If they want to put tariffs on U.S.-related stuff, why don't you put tariffs on the IP that you guys steal from us, China? That would be great. So maybe they stop stealing more of it, and therefore Trump can put him on at least a little better behavior plan.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. The CCP has been stealing intellectual property for decades, surveillance, propaganda. And this is why I raised this with Vice President J.D. Vance in my interview this week to find out what they're going to do. Right now, it's about tariffs, but there are other levers to pull in terms of pushing back on communist China. Here is what happened when I asked Vice President J.D. Vance about it this week.
We'll see what happens, but I think, unfortunately, the retaliation has already happened. The problem with this whole idea that they're going to retaliate is they have already been taking advantage of America for decades. The retaliation is Donald Trump saying no more. We're not going to be taken advantage of anymore, and I think it's important the president is doing what he's doing. Now, look, it looks different ways and comes in different forms, whether you're talking about Canada or China or Mexico. We know that Mexico has allowed the facilitation of the illegal drug trade and illegal sex trafficking for years and has done nothing about it. If they want to be a better partner to us, the time starts now. We know the Chinese, of course, have stolen American manufacturing jobs for 30, 40 years, and also that they facilitated the trafficking of illegal fentanyl into Mexico, where the drug cartels then bring it into our country. We are sick of being taken advantage of. We still have, thank God, the biggest economy in the entire world, the best people and the best workers. But the message from President Trump to the entire world is very clear. We are done being taken advantage of.
Well, we'll see how this plays out because now China is retaliating. Let me bring in MJP Wealth Advisors President Brian Vendig. Brian, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Glad you made it into this segment. Your reaction to China now responding to President Trump's tariffs?
Well, I think this is an environment where we're seeing tit for tat, and I think the concern that investors have and the concern for the economy is we don't want this to spiral out of control. Now, these responses from China this morning only impact about 9% of goods that the U.S. imports into China. So I see this more as a political move on China's part, but we really have to keep a watchful eye because, as we know, second biggest economy in the world, this definitely could impact supply chains and profits for companies moving forward. But let's hope that negotiations help to provide some mediation as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, one question that I asked the vice president over the weekend is whether or not, and we ran this yesterday in an exclusive, whether or not he would be supportive of yanking Chinese stocks off of U.S. exchanges. Look, China can fight back any way it wants, but the bottom line is China's economy is in trouble. And Xi Jinping is not as strong as a lot of people believe. So if you yank those Chinese stocks from U.S. exchanges, basically you cut off funding of our #1 adversary from ordinary investors. Some of these companies are on exchanges. Some of them have already been sanctioned. So what about that? What kind of an impact would that have, Brian, on markets?
Well, we're seeing the market, being really binary, Maria, because just as we saw yesterday on Monday, the concern about tariffs really caused the pre-market in the morning to be quite volatile. And I think a move like that is only going to add uncertainty as investors are concerned on where the path of returns are going to go this year. I think longer term, businesses adjust, consumers adjust, spending adjusts, and profits end up taking a bigger emphasis to keep valuations where they are. So could we move through this appropriately and still have a positive year in the markets over the balance of the year with good earnings? I still think that's positive, Maria, but in the short term, it's just going to add to this volatility cycle, and it's going to make it hard for business leaders to plan accordingly.
Well, Scott, same question for you. Here's what the vice president said when I posed the question to him. Watch, here's J.D. Vance.
So what can the administration do about pushing back on communist China? I mean, the president made a remark the other day that, look, it's not just TikTok. You've got surveillance in your own phone if it's made in China. You've got surveillance everywhere. I mean, we've got, spy balloons from China, surveillance, propaganda, undermining the United States at every turn. What are you going to do about it?
Tariffs are in some ways a penalty for the Chinese taking advantage of America's economy, for sending drugs into our country. They have to actually face some consequences for doing what they've done now for 20, 30, 40 years to our country, Maria. And part of what the tariffs do is they allow the president to have a negotiation with the Communist Chinese Party about actually having a little bit more of a balanced relationship. Whereas we used to have one where the Chinese stole our jobs, took advantage of us, stole our intellectual property, and sent a lot of crap into our country like illegal drugs. We now actually want to have a much more balanced relationship with the Chinese, but that's going to require, I think, the Chinese to face some consequences. So there are ways to fight back. We're starting to do that now, and we're going to keep on doing it over the next 4 years.
Scott, if President Trump pulls the economic levers, such as removing Chinese stocks from exchanges, it seems to me that would be a massive message to the CCP.
That'd be a load of crap, I think, for China to handle, as J.D. Vance used that word very, very explicitly. The tough thing for me, Maria, is communist China. I mean, they're communist and they are a competitor, second biggest economy in the world. I don't trust them very much. And it's a controlled economy, too, by the government. And they control their people. They control their businesses. They do whatever they want. Right. When their back is against the wall, as you said about President Xi's health, God knows what else is going on there. He's not very popular, by the way. What a shocker. They can do anything they want over there. And I think they're going to fight this one pretty hard. I'm glad that Trump is taking on this battle and this fight versus Joe Biden, because we would lose that one for sure.
Well, that's right, especially since the Oversight Committee told us tens of millions of dollars were taken in by the Biden family from China. Let's talk about this sovereign wealth fund. President Trump announcing the first ever U.S. sovereign wealth fund to serve as an economic development tool, with a suggestion on what could be one of its first acquisitions. Watch.
We're going to be doing something perhaps with TikTok, and perhaps not. If we make the right deal, we'll do it. Otherwise, we won't. But I have the right to do that, and we might put that in the sovereign wealth fund, whatever we make, or if we do a partnership with very wealthy people. A lot of options.
So the TikTok ban takes effect in about 2 months. It seems unlikely unless Congress moves quickly to raise the debt ceiling. I guess the big question here, Scott, as we've been talking about, who is funding this sovereign wealth fund? Where does the money come from? I've told you what the analyst at TD Cowen is saying this morning. You might find a way to use the proceeds from selling stakes in Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, dedicated funding sources like fees paid to the government for oil and gas leases. We haven't heard specifics from the president in terms of how this sovereign wealth fund gets funded.
A lot of funding sources potential, Maria, and a lot of ways to spin this one. I'm going to spend the rest of this show trying to convince you that maybe we don't say it's a tax, Maria, but maybe how about the tax receipts? We have Treasury Department getting record amounts of tax receipts every year as the economy grows. Maybe slice off a bit off the top there and throw it into a sovereign wealth fund that helps grow America, and therefore that's something we can all get on board with as far as what the government spends our tax revenues on, which is usually crap, to use J.D. Vance's name.
Real quick before you go, Brian, you want to buy stocks here in the face of this weakness?
I think when you look at earnings and earnings coming in still beating analyst estimates for the period of time, I think right now being selective and buying stocks still makes sense. We saw that yesterday with market participants coming in, Maria, and buying on the dip. So don't overweight to mega cap tech, but look for some of these other areas that are growing earnings.
All right, Brian Bendig, thanks for joining the conversation. Scotty Martin, you're with us all morning. Welcome back. Well, the Democrat National Committee holding its leadership vote over the weekend to elect a new chairman. But even though their unfavorability rating is at a 16-year high, and as the Democrats gear up for the 2028 presidential race, it seems they haven't learned any lessons from their crushing 2024 defeat. Watch this.
I have a show of hands. How many of you believe that racism and misogyny played a role in Vice President Harris's defeat? Okay. So that's good. You all passed. When your government is doing you wrong, you fight on. Oh, you fight on.
On this next ballot, you will be able to vote for 2 candidates of any gender on the next ballot. If 2 candidates receive, I'm going to turn to Helen to clarify this last part.
You may vote for 2 males, 2 females, 2 of any gender, okay? Nope, you can't do that because we've got to balance. You could vote for 1 of any gender, okay? Or no, non-binary gender, excuse me.
Okay, non-binary genders. Got it. Okay. Democrats eventually electing Ken Martin as the new chairman, someone who once called for President Trump to be tried for treason. 24-year-old left-wing activist and gun control advocate David Hogg was also named vice chair. Racism and misogyny, that's why Kamala Harris lost? I tell you, I don't know. And I don't know what they said over there about all the genders, okay? Samantha, your reaction.
Well, this is a party that is extraordinarily out of touch, and they've learned nothing from the last election. You know, in the months leading up to the November 2024 election, polling was showing that upwards of 80% of the country felt that we were going on the wrong track with respect to the policies that matter most to Americans, economic policies, securing the border. And yet Democrats are still talking about non-binary candidates, gender pronouns, DEI, racism. It's just that they've learned nothing. They're going to continue to lose, and they need to refocus if they want to get their party in the right direction. Refocus on policies that Americans have said they want to see change.
Look, I know they all stick together all the time, Cheryl, but don't you think that after November 5th, they might actually take a look at what's important to the American people as they decide who's going to lead their party? Don't you think it's time to actually say, oh, wait a minute, inflation, immigration, these were 2 really important things, instead of bringing up misogyny and racism, which had nothing to do with Kamala Harris's massive defeat? How about being prepared?
It was about policy, and that defeat, I mean, I have to remind them that this nation did elect Barack Obama as our president twice. But so, you know, and he came out and his wife did. They all came out and supported Kamala Harris. It wasn't about that. It had nothing to do with race, had nothing to do with gender, Maria. It had to do with the misguided policies and the fact that she, at the end of the day, was a weak candidate. And Joe Biden, many say, set her up for failure. As far as the DEI conversation, which was coming up during this meeting, you know, that was a sleeper issue during the election. We learned that post election in voter analysis because voters said they don't care about DEI. They don't care about pronouns in the military. They want safety. They want security. They want economic security. And none of those things were being delivered under the Biden-Harris administration. But I will say this. There are certain groups, obviously not at that meeting, but there are certain groups in the Democratic circles that are doing a deep dive into why they lost to try and figure out how they're going to handle the midterms.
Well, I don't know if they were at that meeting. I just don't know. But this Quinnipiac poll shows that we're talking about the worst unfavorable rating for the Democrat Party since Quinnipiac started pulling the question. And that is only 31% of voters view the Democrat Party favorably. 57% hold this unfavorable view of the party, Scott, and they're not hearing it.
They don't even get it. As a white male and born that way, Maria, I'm actually kind of nervous to answer this because they'll probably attack me. Ken Martin, by the way, is not related to me, so people on the internet can leave me alone about that one. It's amazing to me that it keeps going down this road, this path. Let them do it. I mean, at what point are they going to get the message and they're just going to keep falling behind? If the election didn't tell them to change the route, I don't know what's going to. I mean, certainly not going to be David Hogg and my former brother Ken Martin doing it because that leadership is doomed.
Yeah, by the way, on the flip side, the GOP holds a 43% favorable rating, 12 points higher than the Democrats, and a 45% unfavorable, which is 12 points lower than the Democrats. So you haven't seen this kind of support for Republicans in a long time, Samantha. And it's because of the Republicans sticking to the issues that matter to the American people.
Absolutely. This was an election about policy, and Donald Trump had policies that were going to benefit the American people. He had a plan. Kamala Harris basically said, even though 80% of the country thinks we're on the wrong track, I would do nothing differently with respect to the border and everything else. So to Scott's point, this is a party that is refusing to listen to the American people, and they're just demonstrating what utter contempt and disrespect they have for the voters because they refuse to listen to what they want, what direction they want this country to go.
Yeah. All right, let's take a short break. Well, welcome back. Well, the Senate confirming Christopher Wright as Energy Secretary last night as Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. face key committee votes today. Cheryl Casoni with all the details. Cheryl.
That's right, Maria. So Wright was confirmed as Secretary of Energy last night. The vote was 59-38. The Senate Intelligence Committee, meanwhile, will vote today on advancing Tulsi Gabbard's nomination out of committee, the next step in bringing her full confirmation vote for Director of National Intelligence to the Senate floor. Now, Gabbard facing a tough vote, even among Republicans. Indiana Senator Todd Young has not said one way or the other if he is going to vote for Gabbard, but Senator Susan Collins says that she will be voting yes for Gabbard. Now, the Senate Finance Committee is going to vote to send RFK Jr.'s nomination out of committee for Health and Human Services Secretary. All eyes are on Senators Bill Cassidy, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitch McConnell, none of whom have committed to backing Kennedy yet. So a lot's going to happen today. Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu meeting with President Trump at the White House today, becoming the first foreign leader to meet with Trump in a second term. Netanyahu also spoke with U.S. Middle East Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz yesterday. This as the administration reportedly is pushing Congress to approve a $1 billion weapons sale to Israel. That would include thousands of bombs and armored bulldozers. Well, State Farm Insurance is asking for an emergency rate hike from California state regulators after wildfires devastated the Los Angeles area. The company is seeking a 22% increase for homeowners and a 15% hike for renters that would go into effect by May 1st. It's also warning multi-billion-dollar payouts threaten its balance sheet, saying the boost is necessary to stay solvent. California's insurance commissioner will review the application to ensure that consumers are not being overcharged. Remember, State Farm did cancel large amounts of policies around Pacific Palisades last summer. Well, the Trump administration reportedly is considering a sweeping executive order that would dismantle the Department of Education, shifting power back to the states and limiting federal involvement in schools. Officials discussing moves to shut down parts of the agency not explicitly written into statute or fold its functions into other departments. Now, this comes as a new report finds the Education Department doled out over $200 million to universities in order to fund counseling courses pushing DEI content. including topics on microaggressions and white privilege. And Maria, just want to add that President Trump said multiple times he believes that education should be the responsibility of the states.
Yes, that's right. He wants to push it back to the states. And Samantha, as they look for areas to cut, he's going to zero in on what he deems as waste.
Right. President Trump is committed to the American people, that he's dedicated to right-sizing the federal government, eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse at these federal agencies. And there's no greater example than the Department of Education. Cheryl, I've read reports that there's over $1 billion doled out for DEI programs at the Department of Education. They're not educating a single student. We could send this function back to the states appropriately, and President Trump is right to do so.
Yep. What do you think, Scott?
I give it an F. Zoink Scoop, if you really want to find out what the real verdict is on this, look at the companies that were pretty much forced to implement this policy and have scrapped it basically not less than, say, 2 years later. So if you really want to see this, not only take it from the government, but look at corporate America that said, yeah, you know what, we're actually probably regretting that, along with that ESG, to use Vance's term, crap from some years ago. Companies are saying, no thanks, we're going to move on and do our own thing.
Yep. All right, let's get a look at your forecast. Kick the hour off with the hot topic of the hour. Elon Musk and Doge under the microscope after gaining access to the U.S. Treasury Department data and payment systems. Fox Business's Hillary Vaughn on Capitol Hill now with the very latest. Hillary.
Good morning, Maria. Well, the man who opened the doors of the Treasury Department to Doge is now being sued. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, union groups filing the lawsuit saying it's violating their members' right to privacy, giving Musk access to this information, saying, quote, people who must share information with the federal government should not be forced to share information with Elon Musk or his Doge, and federal law says they do not have to. This as Democrats in D.C. did something they rarely do, work on a Monday. They held press conferences and rallies calling Elon Musk and his Doge team a shadow government that is conducting a hostile takeover of our country.
To give Doge a chokehold on Treasury payments is outlandishly dangerous. It's like putting a tiger into a petting zoo and then hoping for the best.
We are living a nightmare created by Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and we need to wake up.
Musk and Doge are not outsiders. The White House saying that Musk does have an official job title, special government employee, and the Department of Government Efficiency is a government agency part of the executive branch. Musk reacting to Democrats' outrage, calling it hysterical and explaining why Doge needed to get access to payment information in the first place, saying the only way to stop fraud and waste of taxpayer money is to follow the payment flows and pause suspicious transactions for review. Obviously, naturally, this causes those who have been aiding, abetting, and receiving fraudulent payments very upset. Too bad. Republicans say Doge is doing the dirty work that no one else has done in D.C., adding up every dollar and cent of taxpayer cash that is being spent.
Some of the tofu-eating wokarati at the USAID are screaming like they're part of a prison riot because they don't want us reviewing the spending. But that's all Mr. Musk is doing. To my friends who are upset, I would say with respect, call somebody who cares.
And Maria, Republicans think that Democrats actually do not really care and can't defend every dollar that has been spent, particularly the money that has flowed from the USAID. They say that if they had to defend that spending, they wouldn't be able to, but they're just mad that the spigot's being shut off. Maria?
Wow. All right, Hillary, thank you. Really interesting developments here. Scott Martin, your reaction. Musk needs access to the information in order to assess where waste may be. On the other hand, he's a special government employee and not a cabinet member. Your thoughts?
Oh, darn. So he shouldn't have it. I mean, listen, the access to that information, if people didn't realize, is already kind of out there anyway. It's already going to nefarious sources. So that information is not that sacred. I'm glad it's going to somebody as responsible as Elon Musk. And by the way, when it comes to Elizabeth Warren and some folks on the left who are talking about this, crazy rule that everybody has out there with regards to Trump and the administration, how about the fact that Elizabeth Warren, we found out about some of your applications over the course of your career career, which made references to the Native American heritage, which you don't have. So we've got access to all this data, whether we like it or not, or whether you like it or not. And I'm glad that somebody responsible has their hands on it, like Elon Musk, to fix some of the problems in D.C.
Well, what do you think, Cheryl?
I do. Look, USAID was not on my bingo card. I'm going to be honest. But what I think is so interesting is you got to remember here, you mentioned cabinet officials versus Elon Musk. Well, Scott Bessent, who is the Treasury Secretary, gave Elon Musk and his executive staff access to those Treasury records because we have to look at where the money is going. And if there are ineffective uses of taxpayer money, the veil does need to be lifted. And that is the purpose of DOGE. Of course, these officials are going to cry and scream and complain because this is their paychecks and their autonomy that is being taken away. But we've had 4 years of Joe Biden who wasn't paying attention to any of this. And here we are with massive deficits and 36 trillion plus in debt, Maria. So something has to change.
Your thoughts, Samantha?
These are President Trump's executive agencies. It's his prerogative to deputize whomever he wants to investigate the waste, fraud, and abuse that has gone on at these agencies for too long. And of course, the deep state bureaucrats don't want this looked into because just in the short time that Elon has had access to these systems, he's found that Treasury's default was to authorize and approve payments to any entity. He found fraudulent payments to terrorist groups automatically approved because Treasury has no oversight over where their money is going. So, of course, the bureaucrats who have aided and abetted this don't want sunlight on that.
And real quick on this sovereign wealth fund, President Trump signed an executive order yesterday to create the first ever U.S. sovereign wealth fund with a suggestion on what could be the first purchase or among the first. Watch.
We're going to have a sovereign wealth fund, which we've never had. We have a lot of things that create wealth. As an example, TikTok, we're going to be doing something perhaps with TikTok and perhaps not. If we make the right deal, we'll do it. Otherwise, we won't. But I have the right to do that, and we might put that in the sovereign wealth fund.
What do you think, Samantha? Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick are leading the project. It's unclear how this fund will be capitalized, but Trump has previously pitched using tariff money to potentially fund it. Of course, he's also talked about the External Revenue Service, but the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world are owned by Norway, China, Hong Kong, and the Emirates. Samantha, I think this is a great idea. I really do. I just wonder how it's going to be funded. And I mentioned earlier, one analyst at TD Cowen says the Treasury might find some sources from fees paid to the government for oil and gas leases, and it could find proceeds from selling its stakes in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as one way to generate funding.
I think, those details need to be worked out. Certainly with deregulation and unleashing our domestic energy industry, that could be one way to generate some royalties. But for me, this is so exciting because the titans of business are back in Washington. And these folks that know how to create wealth are going to bring those skills to bear for the benefit of all Americans. And so this is a really intriguing idea that Trump has said he wants his agencies to study, and I think it's a good one.
Yeah, make America wealthy again. All right, we'll slip in a short break. We're just getting started.